The feed that watches back. I used to think the internet was only dangerous in the obvious ways, scams, stalkers, people who could ruin your life with a few clicks. I didn't believe a video could reach out of a screen and touch you. I believed distance was a wall. I believed I could close a tab and the world would go back to normal. That belief lasted until a quiet night outside Detroit when I watched a live stream that showed a single metal door, and I learned what it feels like to be noticed by something you can't see. I worked nights as security at a warehouse on the edge of the city, the kind of place built for trucks and pallets, not people. The yard is a grid of cracked asphalt and chain-link fence washed in orange sodium light that turns every puddle into a bruise. Inside the guard shack, the air always carries the same stale mix, burnt coffee, damp jackets, and warm electronics. The fluorescent strip above the desk whines like a trapped insect. After midnight, even small sounds become personal. The click of a pen, a distant truck air break the slow tick of the wall clock. On slow shifts, the hours don't pass. They stack up. Derek Holt had been assigned to my rotation for a while. Same age range, same dead-eyed patients, but with a habit of watching the security monitors like he expected them to blink first. He wasn't the type to tell stories for fun. When Derek spoke, it usually meant something had already gone wrong somewhere. Around 2 a.m, with the monitors showing nothing but empty bays and motionless corridors, Derek set his phone down and said, "You ever get the sense you're not the one doing the browsing?" I didn't look up from the log sheet. "If you're trying to sell me on ghosts, save it." "It's not ghosts," he said. His voice was low, careful. "It's a feed. Deep web. No chat, no ads, no commentary. Just a camera and a code." I finally looked at him. "Let me guess. Real." Derek's jaw tightened like he'd expected the sarcasm. "Yeah," he said. "Real enough that it stops being entertainment." I should have shut the conversation down. Instead, boredom gave him an opening. "What code?" I asked. He tore a strip from a receipt and wrote on it with blocky, impatient strokes, BRL 197. He slid it across the desk like it was contraband. "Don't ask me for the link," he said. "Don't try to be clever. If you're stupid enough to search, keep it short." "You're telling me to not watch it," I said while handing me the name. Derek didn't smile. "I'm telling you there's a difference between seeing something and staying with it." His wording bothered me. It sounded less like advice and more like a rule. The rest of the shift was routine fence check, lock check, another lap around the yard. The wind pushed at the loading dock doors with a hollow thump. A plastic bag skated across the pavement like it was being pulled. Nothing happened, and that nothing made the receipt in my pocket feel heavier than it should. At dawn, I drove home through streets that looked rinsed clean by cold air. My apartment building smelled of bleach and old smoke, the stairwell lighting flickering as if it couldn't decide to commit. I told myself I'd sleep. I even set my phone face down like a good decision could be made by posture. Then I unfolded the receipt. 10 seconds, I promised myself. 10 seconds to prove it was nonsense. Downloading the browser Derek had mentioned felt like installing any other program. That was the first trick, how ordinary the doorway looked. When it opened, the interface was plain, almost sterile. I typed BRL 197 into a search index I didn't understand, clicked a result with nothing but a black page and a video window and hit play. The image appeared instantly. A metal door in a concrete wall. Industrial thick paint worn away at the edges. Rust bloomed around the hinges and along the bottom seam. The floor in front of it was stained darker in a fan shape, like something had pooled and dried. No title, no timestamp, no sound. The camera was centered steady and too clean. It didn't have the mushy grain of old CCTV. It looked deliberate, like someone had composed the shot and then walked away. I leaned in, hunting for proof it was a loop, any micro jump, any compression stutter. The door didn't move, the lighting didn't flicker, the stillness wasn't comforting. It was patient. I shut the laptop after a few minutes, irritated with myself for letting boredom drag me into a corner of the internet I didn't need. I went to bed and the door followed me into sleep the way a melody does, not loud, just persistent. The next night at work, Derek didn't ask, but he watched me as if he could see the receipt paper behind my eyes. I told myself I was done. Then the following morning I checked again. Same page, same door. But now, in the center of the metal, there was a handprint, full palm, and splayed fingers, dark and glossy like wet paint that hadn't decided to dry. My throat went tight. I stared until my eyes watered, trying to force a simple explanation into place. Someone had walked up and touched it. Someone had staged it. Someone wanted attention. The problem was how the print looked: ridges, drag marks, a smear at the heel of the palm. It didn't read like a Halloween prop, it read like skin. I closed the laptop hard and paced my kitchen, cheeks hot with embarrassment and fear. The hallway outside my apartment was empty. The street below was empty. Nothing about my world had changed except the fact that it felt like it had. That night, Derek caught me fidgeting and said, "It changed, didn't it?" I didn't answer quickly enough. Derek's eyes flicked toward the monitors, then back. "Don't turn it into a habit," he said. "Routine is how you hand a stranger your name." "Introduce myself," to who I snapped. Derek exhaled slowly, like he was weighing how much to say. "To whoever's holding the camera," he said. "To whoever's keeping score." The phrase "keeping score" stayed with me. It turned the handprint from a scare into a signal. And once my brain labeled it a signal, it started searching for the sender. The third time I watched, the camera angle had dropped slightly, only a few inches, but enough that the door looked taller, more imposing. I told myself it was nothing. Then a sound arrived from the speaker so faint I thought it was my radiator. At first a slow rasp, like something heavy sliding over rough concrete. I turned the volume up. The rasp continued, irregular, effortful. Not a looped effect, not a clean soundtrack, a body doing work. I shut the laptop again, sat on my couch and listened to my own apartment, the refrigerator cycling, a neighbor's distant TV, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. I decided right then that Derek was right. I decided I would stop. Then my phone chimed with a new email. The sender address was a scrambled string. The subject line was blunt, almost bored. "We saw you watching." The email body was empty. There was a single attachment. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. I didn't open it. I powered the phone down and put it in a drawer, like hiding the message could keep it from existing. I went to work that night with sand in my eyes and fear in my stomach. Derek listened while I told him about the email, and he didn't look surprised. That frightened me more than the subject line. "That's what I mean," he said. "It's not the video. It's the response." "You think it's hackers?" I said. I wanted a word that belonged to the real world. Derek nodded once. "People," he said, "and people don't need ghosts to ruin you." I tried not to watch again. I tried for a full day. And then, out of anger more than curiosity, I opened the attachment. It was a still frame of the same door, closer than before, angled down slightly, as if the camera had been carried forward. The handprint was smeared. Near the bottom seam, inside a narrow gap, there was a pale scrap on the floor that looked like fabric. I deleted the email. I emptied the trash. I restarted the phone. 5 minutes later, the email returned unchanged. That was the moment the story stopped feeling like a prank and started feeling like a net. I started leaving my phone turned off, but it didn't matter. The next day, the message returned on my laptop, instead an icon on the desktop that wasn't there before, a file named still.png sitting in the open like it belonged. I hadn't downloaded anything. I hadn't clicked any link. Yet there it was, waiting, as if the point was not the file itself, but the fact that someone could place it in my space. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. The existence of the file was the threat. At the warehouse, I kept my eyes on the ground and my hands busy. I walked the fence line twice per hour instead of once. I checked padlocks until the cold metal made my fingers ache. Every time the wind shoved a loose chain against a post and it scraped, I felt my stomach drop. The world had started mimicking the sound from the feed, and my body responded before my brain could argue. Derek watched me spiral through routine and finally said, "You're trying to outwork it. At least work makes sense," I said. "Sense doesn't protect you," he answered. "Rules do." "What rules?" I demanded. Derek tapped the edge of the desk with one finger slow. "No more looking," he said. "No more trying to prove it's real. If you're thinking about it, it's already got you in its mouth." "You're talking like it's a predator," I said. Derek's eyes stayed flat. "Call it whatever makes you sleep," he said, "but don't feed it." I nodded like I agreed. Then, because I needed to believe I had some control, I did the thing Derek warned about. I watched again, telling myself it was investigation. I watched because the alternative, waiting for the next message without knowing what it might contain, felt worse. This time, the door was open. The gap was narrow, but it revealed a corridor beyond concrete walls stained with long streaks, dim light pooling in a way that made the darkness feel thick. Hooks were screwed into the walls at regular intervals, the metal dull as if it had been handled too many times. One hook held a torn blouse ripped clean down the back. Dark stains stiffened the collar. The rasping scrape was louder now, joined by a softer thump that suggested weight shifting as it moved. I realized I was holding my breath. My chest hurt. My fingers hovered over the lid, ready to slam it shut, but my eyes refused to leave the corridor. I wanted the horror to announce itself. I wanted a shape. I wanted a villain. The corridor gave me none of that. It gave me evidence instead, objects arranged with purpose, a space built for a reason. I did what scared people do when they need an anchor. I started searching for context. I typed through forums and old news sites, chasing keywords like hooked corridor trophies, lipstick scarves. Most results were fiction. Some were hoaxes. But buried among them were fragments of a real case from Uttar Pradesh, women murdered in rural districts, strangled with cloth possessions taken. Local rumor threads used a word I hadn't seen before, drishti, the curse of a gaze that sticks to you. One post claimed the killer believed he could carry a person's life by keeping what touched them. Another described a folk belief: if someone watches you with hunger, you should cover your name because names are handles. I laughed once, short and ugly. The laugh died quickly. The problem wasn't whether the folklore was true. The problem was how well it explained the behavior I was watching someone collecting, arranging, offering. On the feed, the camera had moved forward by a few feet since the last time I checked. Not a cut a shift. The corridor perspective was closer, the torn blouse, larger details, sharper. The motion felt human, the tiny wobble of a handheld camera set down again. A new object appeared on the left, a crude shelf bolted into the wall. Lipstick tubes were lined up across it like cartridges. Some were intact, some crushed, some missing caps. One in particular, a deep red with a cap, marred as if it had been chewed, caught the light in a way that made my stomach roll. It looked used. It looked personal. I snapped the laptop shut and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. My apartment felt suddenly too open, like the walls were thin enough to be listened through. The next email arrived within the hour. No body, just a subject line, "Still watching." The attachment was a photo. In the bottom right corner in small white digits was a time 0412. It was afternoon in Michigan. The timestamp wasn't mine. It was a location tag for whoever owned the room. India, the case I'd been reading about. The idea linked itself in my head like a chain clicking into place. I wanted to believe it was someone playing with references, building a narrative out of news articles. But the corridor didn't look like a set. The shelf didn't look like a prop. The space looked like it had always been what it was. That night, Derek noticed my hands shaking as I wrote my rounds in the log. "You went back," he said. I didn't deny it. "There's a shelf," I said. "Lipstick." Derek's face tightened. "That's a list," he said. "It's not decoration." "You've seen it," I said. Derek's eyes shifted away toward the yard. "I saw enough," he replied. "And the one thing I learned is that the feed doesn't just show you what happened. It shows you what it wants you to accept." "What does it want?" I asked. Derek didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice had gone thin. "It wants you to stop thinking of yourself as separate." I drove home at dawn with that sentence lodged in my throat. Later that night, unable to stand the silence, I opened the feed again. The corridor view had progressed. The shelf was closer. The hooks were no longer empty. A body hung from one of them, limp, tied at the ankles, swinging barely as if it had been placed there moments earlier. The face was swollen and indistinct in the dim light. The feet were bare. The skin looked waxy stretched. My stomach folded in on itself. I stood up too fast and nearly fell. I wasn't watching a story. I was watching a crime. I reached for my phone with shaking hands, trying to decide who to call. The thought of explaining any of this to police felt impossible. I imagined the questions I would be asked, the suspicion that would attach to me simply for looking. On the screen, the body swayed once more, and the camera dipped slightly as if the person holding it adjusted grip to get a better view. That tiny human movement broke whatever denial I had left. I slammed the laptop shut and threw up in my sink. When I could stand again, my phone displayed another email notification on its lock screen, as if it had been waiting. Subject: open your eyes. I didn't touch it. My hands were still wet. My mouth tasted like acid. The next time the feed returned, the chair appeared. A woman was strapped to it in a concrete room beyond the corridor wrists, bound with cloth, a scarf knotted across her mouth. The light was dim, but her eyes were bright with panic. She kept glancing past the camera as if tracking footsteps that weren't yet visible. I don't know what broke me more, the fact that she was alive or the fact that the camera lingered on her like she was a display. Bootsteps echoed slow, measured, unhurried. A scarred hand entered frame and rested on her shoulder, not violent, just possessive. The woman jerked a muffled cry, trapped in fabric. The hand slid up to her neck as if measuring. The camera circled her, savoring. The room had no windows, no clues, only concrete and the ritual of attention. Then the hand lifted a strip of cloth, twisted into a loop, and held it up to the lens the way a chef might show a cut of meat before cooking. The video cut to static and went black. I sat there, frozen palms pressed to my knees, trying not to scream. The most terrifying thing was how quietly the feed had shown it. No music, no dramatics, just the calm of someone who believed this was normal. My inbox chimed. Subject: we know your name. This time the attachment wasn't a photo. It was a video file. In the clip, the camera pointed at a concrete wall. The light was harsh close, the camera tilted down. My full name was painted in thick, wet strokes: Ryan Mercer. The paint dripped like fresh blood, slow and heavy. A breath sounded close to the microphone, one calm inhale, one exhale. The clip ended. I stared at my own name until it stopped meaning anything and became a handle. I deleted the file. It returned. I emptied the trash. It returned. I wiped the drive. It returned. It was as if deletion itself was the joke. I spent the next day tearing my digital life apart. I changed passwords twice. I logged out of everything. I deleted accounts. I uninstalled the browser. I taped over my webcam. I shut off my router and yanked cables from the wall. I moved through my apartment like a man trying to scrub fingerprints off his own existence. That night, my laptop was open on the coffee table when I got home, screen glowing. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I knew it. The feed was playing anyway. And the moment I saw it, I understood Derek's point about separateness. The feed didn't need my permission to exist in my home anymore. It had crossed the line from "I watch it" to "it arrives." The corridor had changed again. The chair room was empty now, restraints dangling from the armrests like cut vines. Fresh streaks marked the floor, darker than the concrete, pulled in a line toward the corridor, as if something had been dragged out of frame. A caption appeared across the bottom of the video window, simple white text like a subtitle added for clarity. You saw it. The words shouldn't have been possible. I hadn't signed into anything. There was no chat field, no username. Yet the message landed with the intimate certainty of someone speaking directly into my ear. My television clicked on. The remote sat untouched on the shelf. The screen flashed blue, then switched inputs, and the same corridor appeared larger, brighter, impossible to ignore. It was as if the feed had spilled out of the laptop and claimed the biggest screen in my apartment. Another line of text crawled across the bottom. Now it has your attention again. I backed away until my calves hit the couch. Panic made my hands clumsy. I yanked the TV plug from the wall. The screen went black. I ripped the router cord out too, even though it was already unplugged. I tore at cables like they were vines that could wrap around my throat. My phone lit up again despite being powered down. The screen displayed a photo. It was my apartment building's front entrance shot from across the street. Rain on the pavement reflected the porch light. The angle suggested a car parked at the curb. A second photo appeared without me touching anything. My hallway, the carpet pattern, the tired yellow overhead light. A third, my door. The number plate was clear, then a message, plain text on black, "Don't pretend this is far away." My mouth went dry. The fear had moved from abstract to local. Whatever was behind BRL 197 wasn't only in India. Or it had help. Or it had a network. People, Derek had said, had... I killed the lights and slid the deadbolt as quietly as possible. My hands shook so hard I could feel the tremor in my teeth. I didn't look through the peephole. I didn't want the truth of a face or the humiliation of seeing nothing. I crept to the bedroom window and cracked the curtain. A sedan sat beneath a street lamp across from my building. Engine off. No movement. My phone vibrated once like a pulse. A new file had appeared in my gallery door .mov. I didn't press play with bravery. I pressed play because terror makes you obey the thing that threatens you the way a rabbit freezes, because it hopes stillness will make it invisible. The video was recorded from inside my hallway facing my apartment door. The camera moved closer, steady, savoring each step. A scarred hand entered frame and tapped the door twice, soft, controlled. Then a voice close to the microphone, calm as if ordering coffee. "Ryan, you were curious. Curiosity comes with a bill." The clip ended. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My name had become a lever. A sound came from the hallway outside my door. A quiet shift, the faintest scrape against carpet. I didn't wait for the knock. I grabbed my keys and wallet and ran for the fire escape window, yanking it open and climbing out into cold, wet air. The metal ladder bit my palms. My socks soaked through instantly. I descended too fast, nearly slipping, and landed hard in the alley, pain flaring in my ankle. The sedan's engine started. I sprinted to my car and fumbled the key into the ignition, hands useless from shaking. Headlights flared, the engine coughed to life. In the rearview mirror, the sedan eased away from the curb and followed, not speeding, not rushing, just maintaining contact like a shadow that didn't need to chase. I drove without a destination. The city grid blurred, every red light felt like a trap. I took random turns, then doubled back, then cut through a neighborhood I didn't know well, hoping to shake it. The sedan stayed behind me through 3 turns, then 4, always at the same patient distance. My phone lit up on the passenger seat with the corridor feed, as if it had been waiting for the moment my eyes left the road. A line of text flashed, "Keep moving." I threw the phone into the back seat. The sedan's headlights stayed in my mirror. A freight train crossed an intersection ahead, barrier, arms down. I had to stop. My hands tightened around the steering wheel until my fingers cramped. The sedan rolled to a stop behind me. Between us, the night felt suddenly thin, like a membrane about to tear. I watched the train crawl past boxcar after boxcar graffiti, sliding by like slow-moving masks. My mouth tasted like pennies. If someone got out of that sedan and approached my car, there would be nothing I could do but watch. The barrier arms finally lifted. I accelerated so hard my tires chirped blue through the intersection and took the first on-ramp to the freeway. The sedan followed. It wasn't trying to hide. That was the point. This wasn't a robbery. It was instruction. At a gas station outside the city, I pulled in under bright lights and parked near a cluster of people. I got out, forcing my body to move like I wasn't terrified. My hands shook as I inserted my credit card at the pump, then I stopped and yanked it back. Credit cards leave a trail. Names leave trails. I went inside and paid cash. I bought a cheap prepaid phone and a pack of gum. I didn't want just to look normal. The clerk didn't meet my eyes. People learn not to. In the bathroom, I wiped my face with paper towels and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked like a man who had been running without moving. I powered on the prepaid phone long enough to activate it, then shut it off again. I snapped my SIM card from my main phone and dropped it into the toilet, flushed, watched it spin away like a tiny piece of my old life. When I returned to my car, the sedan was gone. Relief should have followed. Instead, dread filled the gap. Predators vanish when they're close enough to touch. I drove west without telling anyone. I didn't call my boss. I didn't call my parents. Each call felt like opening another door. For days, I lived on highways and gas stations. I changed phones twice, then stopped using them. I paid with cash. I slept in my car under rest area lights with my keys in my hand like a weapon. I kept expecting to see that scarred hand in the corner of my windshield reflection. The emails stopped. The feed stopped. Silence returned in a way that felt almost kind. I started to believe distance might work after all. I started to think Derek's fear had been contagious, not prophetic. That's how the trap resets. It lets you think you've recovered control. In New Mexico, I rented a motel room under a name that wasn't mine. The sign outside flickered vacancy in a tired red like it was blinking through a hangover. The carpet smelled of cleanser and old cigarettes. I showered until the water went cold, trying to rinse off the feeling of being watched. Afterward, I turned on the room TV for background noise. A weather report, a sitcom rerun, human voices talking about nothing. It felt like medicine. My prepaid phone had been dead for hours. Against my better judgment, I plugged it into the wall to charge. I told myself one charged phone didn't mean I was back online. I told myself the world couldn't possibly be that precise. The TV switched inputs. The screen flashed blue, then the corridor appeared as if it had always lived there. Concrete walls, hooks, the lipstick shelf, the metal chair. A caption popped up at the bottom in plain white letters, "You came all this way." My stomach turned to ice. I snatched the phone off the charger and tore the cord from the outlet. The TV image didn't change. It held the corridor like a channel. Then the camera started walking. Not in the corridor. In a motel hallway. Beige walls, patterned carpet, door numbers sliding past. The movement had the gentle bob of human steps. My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. The camera stopped in front of a door and centered the number. My room. In the real room, my door received 3 soft taps spaced evenly. Not loud, not urgent, like someone who expected me to come to them. On the TV feed, the scarred hand lifted and knocked on the door in the video at the same moment, an echo designed to make sure I understood the connection. A voice spoke through the TV speakers, close, steady. "You can cross state lines. You can't step out of your own attention." I didn't think. I moved. I grabbed my bag and keys and went out the window, ripping the screen loose with shaking hands. I dropped into the gravel strip behind the motel and ran across the parking lot, barefoot, the stones biting into my soles. I didn't look back at room 206. I didn't want to see the door opening. Behind me, I heard the motel room door swing on its hinges, then close again, slow. I crossed the road without checking for traffic and plunged into the dark beyond the lot, into scrub and brittle brush. The air smelled of dust and gasoline. The night was huge and empty, the kind of empty that makes you feel small. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs trembled, then I dropped behind a low rise and tried to silence my breathing. My phone buzzed in my bag even though I'd yanked it from power. I pulled it out with fingers that didn't feel like mine. The screen was on. A live video showed the inside of room 206. The camera faced the motel door from within. The scarred hand raised a motel keycard to the lens, then slid it through the lock with ease. The voice spoke softly, almost amused. A lock only helps if the person on the other side respects it. The feed cut to black and displayed a single sentence in white text, "Don't close your eyes." I turned the phone off and threw it into the dirt. It turned itself back on. That was when I understood that this wasn't only digital. Digital was just the easiest way to speak. After dawn, I walked away from the highway and didn't stop until I found a road that looked forgotten. I drank from a faucet behind a closed gas station. I kept moving. I told myself I could live without screens. I told myself if the feed couldn't find a device, it couldn't find me. I was wrong. After I ran into the scrub behind the motel, I didn't stop at the edge of the lights. I kept moving until the glow from the parking lot thinned into a distant smear, and the only illumination came from the stars. The desert at night isn't silent the way a room is silent. It's alive with small sounds, dry grass, clicking insects, buzzing wind, worrying at brush. Those noises should have been comforting. Instead, they made me flinch because every scrape reminded my nervous system of concrete and hooks. I crouched behind a low rise and forced my breath to slow. My feet throbbed from gravel cuts, each pulse a sharp reminder that I was real and still here. Somewhere in the distance, a semi passed on the highway, its engine rumble fading like thunder. I waited for footsteps. I waited for a flashlight beam to sweep the dirt. I waited for the calm voice to speak again. Nothing happened. And that nothing was almost worse because it felt like permission. Like the thing hunting me didn't need to hurry. By sunrise, the air had warmed enough to lift heat off the ground in faint waves. I walked until I found a frontage road, then followed it until I reached a truck stop. My legs moved on numb willpower. When I stepped into the bathroom, a man at the sink glanced at my bleeding feet and looked away immediately. In truck stops, everyone has a reason to keep their eyes to themselves. I washed my feet, wrapped them in paper towels, and sat on a toilet seat lid to think. My bag was lighter than it should have been. In the motel panic, I had left my wallet behind. My car keys were in my pocket, but the car itself was in the motel lot, and I couldn't go back for it. The idea of returning to room 206 felt like walking toward a cliff edge. I counted my cash-crumpled bills, not much. I bought a cheap pair of flip-flops and a bottle of water. I ate a stale sandwich because my stomach demanded something solid. Then I walked to the payphone out front, stared at the receiver, and realized I didn't know who I could call without turning that call into a new thread. Still I tried. I dialed 911. The ringtone sounded normal, comforting. The operator answered, and for a second I almost told the truth. I almost said there was a live stream showing murders, and now someone is at my motel door in New Mexico, and I'm barefoot in a truck stop, and my name is I hung up. Not because I didn't want help, but because I could already hear the questions. What live stream? Why were you watching? How do you know it's real? Are you high? Are you in danger right now? Where exactly are you? And each answer would build a map. Each answer would make my life a set of coordinates again. I threw the receiver back on the hook hard enough to make it bounce. In the parking lot, I watched people come and go. A mother lifted a toddler from a car seat. A man cleaned his windshield with a squeegee. An older couple argued gently over a receipt. Normal scenes, normal lives. I felt like a ghost observing the living. A trucker with a sunburned neck noticed my pacing and asked if I needed a ride. His voice was casual, kind. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to accept any human offer that wasn't attached to a screen. But the offer came with questions I couldn't answer. "No," I said, "just waiting." He nodded and moved on. I hitched a ride anyway hours later with the delivery driver who didn't ask much beyond "you heading west." I paid him what little cash I had, and he let me sit in the back of the cab while the landscape unrolled red dirt scrubbed distant mesas. Every time his dashboard screen flickered, my spine stiffened. Every time his phone lit up with a notification, I looked away as if the glow could burn. The driver talked about road construction, his ex-wife, his bad knee, ordinary complaints. I clung to his ordinariness like it was a rope. It reminded me the world still had reasons for things. When he dropped me at a gas station outside Albuquerque, he told me to take care of myself. I thanked him too many times and walked away before he could ask my name. That night I slept behind a closed hardware store, curled on a strip of gravel between the building and a chain-link fence. I woke every hour not because a sound startled me, but because my mind refused to let go. It kept replaying the motel hallway on the TV feed, the camera walking toward my door. The detail that haunted me wasn't the threat. It was the smoothness. Someone had practiced that kind of patience. The next morning, with the sun already bright, I found a thrift store and bought a cheap hoodie and a baseball cap. I wanted to change my outline, my silhouette, the shape the world could remember. I bought a pair of sunglasses, even though the day didn't demand them. Hiding behind tinted lenses felt like a small reversal of power. If I'd been watched, I could at least choose what others saw. I drifted from town to town, staying one step ahead of comfort. When I found work cash labor in a yard unloading trucks, I took it, then left before anyone could learn me. I ate in places without TVs. I drank coffee from paper cups and kept my hands wrapped around them for warmth and something to do. The strangest part was that the feed went quiet. No emails, no random files, no captions. I kept expecting a new message to appear, but days passed without one. The silence made me suspicious. It also made me reckless. It tempted me to believe the worst moment had already happened, and I had survived it by moving. In a small motel in eastern Arizona, weeks later, I broke my own rule. I took a room for one night because my body was tired of parking lot gravel. The room smelled of detergent and old air conditioning. I unplugged the TV and shoved it face down against the wall as if that could blind it. I didn't charge any devices because I didn't have any. I lay on the bed fully clothed and stared at the ceiling, waiting for my heartbeat to stop sprinting. Sometime after midnight, I heard a sound in the hallway, soft footfalls, then a pause. I held my breath and listened. The steps continued passing my door, moving on. The only reason they terrified me was because they were quiet. Loud footsteps belong to drunk guests. Quiet footsteps belong to intent. I watched the peephole for shadows and saw none. Still, I didn't sleep. By dawn, my eyes felt sanded. I left with the same exhaustion I'd arrived with, only now exhaustion had sharp edges. In Phoenix, I found a flea market and bought a cheap analog watch. I wanted time without a screen. I wanted to check the hour without lighting myself up like a beacon. The watch ticked loud at night, a small mechanical insistence that felt almost reassuring. Machines can be predictable when they aren't connected. I also began collecting little rituals without admitting that's what they were. Not grand ceremonies, small habits that felt like protections. When I entered a room, I touched the doorframe with 2 fingers, a reflex I told myself was superstition, not necessity. When I sat down to eat, I positioned myself so I could see the entrances. When I walked past a reflective window, I avoided my own face, not wanting to see whether something else might be behind it. One evening, while waiting in a laundromat, I noticed an older man sitting beside his basket, rolling worry beads through his fingers. Hanging from his keychain was a blue glass eye, the same kind of charm I would later buy. He caught me looking and raised his eyebrows as if to say, "You know." I looked away quickly, ashamed of the recognition. There's a loneliness that comes from being afraid of being noticed. It makes you cautious about conversation, cautious about kindness, cautious about all the small exchanges that give life texture. I had stripped those exchanges away like skin. When I finally stepped into a public library outside Flagstaff, it wasn't because I had relaxed. It was because I needed information that wasn't digital. I needed a paper map, a list of back roads, a way to move without leaving a trail through GPS. I told myself I could handle a quiet building full of books. Books don't flash images at you. Books don't glitch. I was wrong in the smallest way possible, a single frame on a child's tablet, and that tiny breach shattered any illusion that the feed was contained. It proved the thing I'd been avoiding. Even if I never touched a browser again, the modern world would keep offering screens, and the feed could hide in any one of them like a needle in a haystack. After that day, I stopped looking at screens entirely, even in passing. I learned to walk with my gaze lowered, scanning the ground for hazards like broken glass and watching my own shadow instead of anyone else's face. It was humiliating, but it worked. If I couldn't control what the world displayed, I could at least control what I took in. The cost was that my life became narrow, stripped of music videos in bars, stripped of movie trailers, playing at gas pumps, stripped of the casual comfort of checking a headline. I wasn't only running from a person. I was running from modernity itself. I didn't start sleeping in storage units immediately. At first I treated them like a daytime hiding spot, a place to stash a bag, a place to sit in quiet without a lobby television yelling at me. But anonymity has a seduction all its own. A storage unit doesn't care who you are. It asks for a lock and a monthly payment. It doesn't ask why you can't provide an ID. It doesn't ask where you're from. It doesn't ask what you're afraid of. When I did finally start spending nights inside them, I chose facilities with bright lights and cameras, the irony not lost on me. I preferred cameras I could see to cameras I couldn't. I preferred a security system with rules to whatever invisible system I'd stumbled into online. Still, the closer I came to living without screens, the more my fear shifted shape. It stopped being about electronics and started being about attention itself, the way a stranger's eyes lingered a second too long, the way a clerk repeated my fake name at a counter, the way a driver glanced twice in a rearview mirror. I began to feel as if being noticed was the trigger, not the method. That's when the folklore I'd half mocked earlier began creeping back into my thoughts. Not because I suddenly believed in magic, but because folklore is a language for patterns. It tells you what people have feared long before they had a word like dox or livestream. It tells you some kinds of attention are dangerous, some gazes cling, some curiosity is a hook. I kept seeing the same symbol everywhere once I started looking for it, a blue glass eye hanging from a taxi mirror, a small charm taped to a cashier's register, a bracelet on a waitress's wrist beads worn smooth by fingers that had rolled them too many times. Most people didn't think about them. Most people wore them like jewelry. But after the corridor, after the chair, after the knock on my motel door, the symbol felt less like fashion and more like a warning label. In a town outside Holbrook, I stopped for gas and noticed a hand-painted sign by the entrance. No loitering, evil eye protection sold inside. I stared at it longer than I meant to. The words were probably meant as a joke, the kind of kitschy Southwest humor tourists buy on t-shirts. But my stomach tightened anyway because I couldn't tell anymore when a joke was just a joke. Inside, near the counter, a jar of small blue beads sat beside the gum and lighters. I picked one up and held it between my fingers. It was cheap glass, cool and smooth. The painted iris stared up at me with an almost insulting calm. I imagined hanging it somewhere and felt a wave of shame. Shame for being scared, shame for wanting a talisman, shame for needing anything that looked like control. I put the bead back and left without buying it. That night I slept in my car behind a closed grocery store. My dreams were thin and jagged. I woke twice, convinced I could hear slow dragging on concrete. The second time I woke, I opened my eyes and saw nothing but darkness and my own breath fogging the window. Yet the sense of presence remained like a static charge on skin. In the morning I drove to a diner and sat at a corner booth with a view of the door. A television hung in the far corner above the kitchen pass-through, muted, cycling through a morning show with subtitles. I forced myself not to look at it. I stared at my hands instead, at the small cuts along my knuckles from climbing fences and ripping cardboard. I chewed my toast without tasting it. A man at the counter laughed at something the TV showed. The laugh was normal, brief, harmless. Still, the sound made me flinch. It reminded me that other people could absorb images casually like air and walk away untouched. I envied them so fiercely it felt like grief. When I paid, the cashier asked for my name for the receipt. "Company policy," she said. She smiled like it was nothing. I gave her a name I'd used before, and she repeated it back loud enough for the cook to hear. It was only 2 syllables, a throwaway label, but my chest tightened, as if she'd spoken a spell. Outside in my car, I sat with the engine off and stared at the steering wheel. The fear wasn't only in my head anymore. It had trained my body. It had made my pulse spike at normal questions. It had made identity feel like bait. That afternoon I stopped at a second-hand store and found an old paperback book on a spinning rack near the register, a collection of ghost stories and folk beliefs from different cultures. I bought it without thinking. I didn't read it for entertainment. I read it like I was studying a map of human fear. One passage stuck with me not because it was poetic, but because it sounded practical. When someone with an evil eye fixes on you, you're told to avoid mirrors, avoid displaying your name, avoid accepting gifts that can be used as anchors. The language was old, the logic was familiar. Whether you called it a curse or called it surveillance, the advice was the same: don't give the watcher handles. That night I dreamed of the metal door again, but in the dream it wasn't in India. It stood in the middle of a parking lot in Arizona, rusted and open with my own shadow stretching into it. When I woke, my throat was sore as if I'd been whispering. The next morning I walked into a diner and saw a newspaper on the counter near the register open to the foreign section. The headline was about arrests in Uttar Pradesh. The text mentioned trophies, mentioned scarves, mentioned women. The story was written like closure, like a period at the end of a sentence. My eyes slid down the page until they caught the filing time printed beneath the reporter's name. 0412. Hope rose and died so quickly it made me dizzy. I left the diner without ordering, got in my car, and drove until the town thinned into desert again. I told myself not to chase symbols. I told myself not to turn folklore into a new kind of web. But the number sat in my head like a hook. By late afternoon, I was parked outside a small strip mall, staring at a storefront window filled with incense and dangling blue charms that looked like eyes. I sat there for a long time with my hands on the steering wheel, deciding whether walking inside would make me ridiculous or make me safer. In the end, I opened the car door. The bell above the shop entrance chimed, once bright and innocent, and I stepped into the smell of smoke and herbs, pretending I was only browsing. The shop was narrow and dim, its windows tinted by hanging strings of beads that knocked together softly when the door closed behind me. Incense burned somewhere out of sight, sweet and resinous, and the smell clung to the back of my throat. Shelves were crowded with small objects that promised certainty. Candles labeled for luck, jars of herbs, bundles of dried sage, little packets of salt tied with red thread. Each item looked like a way to name fear without having to explain it. I moved slowly along the aisles, fingers hovering near trinkets without touching. Part of me wanted to laugh at the idea that a charm could stop a person with a camera and a keycard. Another part of me remembered how the motel TV had switched inputs without my permission and how the handprint had appeared on that metal door like a signature. When your life has already been edited by something you can't reason with, mockery feels like arrogance. Behind the counter, a small radio played static-laced music, the kind of instrumental track meant to sound spiritual. The notes wavered in and out as if the building itself was breathing. A stack of pamphlets sat near the register. Blessings, cleansings, warding rituals. I didn't pick one up. Paper instructions felt dangerously close to participating in a game. I stopped in front of a display of blue glass eyes. Some were bracelets, some were keychains, some were the size of a small plate meant to hang on a wall. Every painted pupil stared back at me with the same calm accusation. I wondered how many people bought them for style. How many for tradition, how many because they had felt what I was feeling now, cornered by attention, desperate for any kind of boundary. My hands trembled slightly. I shoved them into my hoodie pocket, gripping the lining hard enough to hurt. Pain was useful. It kept me anchored. I told myself I would buy one thing and leave. I told myself I would keep it as a reminder, nothing more, a token to mark the moment I decided to stop running blind. The bell over the door chimed again as another customer entered, a woman holding a tote bag. She nodded politely and wandered toward the candles, not looking at me twice. The normality of her presence made my chest loosen for a second. If she could browse here without fear, maybe I could too. Then the radio hissed, and for a heartbeat the static sounded like the faint dragging I had heard through speakers months earlier. My stomach clenched. I turned my head quickly, scanning the room, and saw nothing, only shelves, only charms, only smoke curling lazily in the air. That was the problem. Nothing ever looked wrong until it was. A woman behind the counter looked up. She didn't ask what I wanted. She just watched my face and said, "You look like you've been sleeping with one eye open." Something in me broke. Not a confession, not a story, just a tired nod. She reached under the counter and placed a blue glass bead on the glass surface. An eye was painted on it, the iris dark, the pupil sharp. A Nazar charm. I'd seen them hanging in cars and shops on wrists. Symbols people use to deflect the evil eye, the belief that envy or attention can stick to you like a stain. I stared at it and felt stupid and desperate at the same time. "Does this actually do anything?" I asked. The woman didn't smile. "A charm won't build you a fortress," she said, "but it can tell you when the staring starts." "That's not much," I muttered. "It's more than pretending you're invisible," she replied. I bought the charm, a black thread bracelet, and a small packet of salt because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I told myself it was theater. I told myself I was buying calm. That night I rented a storage unit on the outskirts, one of those facilities with rows of metal doors and bright lot lights that buzz all night. I paid cash. I gave a fake name. The manager barely looked up. People rent storage units for all kinds of reasons, and this place had learned not to judge. Inside my unit, I cleared a patch of floor, laid down flattened cardboard, and sat there with my back against my duffel. The unit smelled of dust and hot metal. The air was dry enough to make my throat scratch. The lot lights leaked in under the door in a thin seam, a strip of yellow that made the dust sparkle. I hung the Nazar bead on the inside latch where it could face outward. I tied the black thread around my wrist and felt ridiculous. Then I opened the salt packet and sprinkled a thin line across the threshold, not because I believed in magic, but because I needed a boundary I could see. I lay down and stared at the ceiling of the unit, a corrugated metal panel that looked like the inside of a shipping container. The silence felt thick, but for once it didn't feel hostile. For once my body sank into sleep without bargaining. I woke to a sound I had promised myself I would never hear away from a screen, a slow rasp outside the storage door, metal on concrete. Pause. Metal on concrete. The sound wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It matched the rhythm I had heard through speakers months earlier, the sound that had crawled into my nervous system and made every chain in the world feel like a threat. My eyes snapped open. The seam of light under the door was unchanged. Dust hung in the air like fog. My skin prickled as if the temperature had dropped. I stared at the Nazar charm. A crack had split the painted eye straight down the middle. The bead swayed gently as if someone or something had brushed past it in the dark. I held my breath so long my chest hurt. My mind tried to assemble logic like a shield. The bead was cheap. It cracked because it was cheap. The sway was caused by a breeze. The scrape was a cart being pushed down the aisle, a groundskeeper dragging something. Then the scrape stopped and 3 soft taps sounded on the metal door, even patient. The taps were not a person banging. They were a person announcing themselves. I backed away until my shoulders hit a stack of boxes. My hands fumbled for anything to hold. My throat tightened so hard I could barely swallow. A voice came through the door, muffled by metal, calm, unmistakable. "Ryan," it said. Hearing my name in that place after weeks of not speaking, it felt like being grabbed by the collar. The word didn't belong here. It had been buried. Yet it slid through the metal like it was thin paper. I pressed my palms against my ears as if I could force the sound out. The voice continued, conversational, almost gentle. "You've been careful," it said. "Careful is good. Careful means you understand the rule." I didn't speak. Speaking felt like opening something. My mind flashed back to Derek's warning about routine and names. I refused to hand over anything else. A thin scrape sounded at the bottom of the door. Something slid beneath it and skated across the dusty floor toward me. A photograph. I stared at it for several seconds, afraid to touch it as if it could burn. Finally, I crept forward and picked it up by one corner. The corridor filled the glossy paper. Concrete walls, Hook's dim yellow light. The lipstick shelf, the metal chair, and taped to the backrest of the chair like a trophy displayed for an audience was my cracked Nazar bead. The painted eye was split. The crack line looked identical. The tiny flaw in the glass near the edge there, too. My stomach turned hot. The photograph shook in my hand. Under the image, someone had printed a single sentence, "The eye is yours now." My knees went weak. I leaned against the wall of the unit, breathing in dust, trying to keep my mind from snapping in half. The curse idea, the folklore, the evil eye, it had been a comfort because it was symbolic. Symbols are easier than reality. A symbol can't drive a sedan, a symbol can't hold a keycard, a symbol can't print a photo and slide it under your door. But someone who believes in symbols can do all of that. The voice outside spoke again softer. "You keep blaming the browser," it said, "but the real threshold is your stare. You crossed it, and it kept the mark." The latch rattled. A small metallic click, followed precise, practiced the sound of a lock being tested by someone who knew what they were doing. A wave of cold surged through my limbs. My body finally did what it was built to do. It moved. At the back of the unit, there was a thin emergency panel that connected to the neighboring row. I'd noticed it earlier and dismissed it as useless. Now it looked like salvation. I tore at the screws with my keys and fingernails, ripping the panel loose with a screech that made my blood freeze. The sound echoed down the aisles. If anyone was listening, I had announced myself. The scrape outside stopped. Silence pressed in for a heartbeat, the kind of silence that means someone is choosing their next action. I crawled through the opening into the next unit, then into the next, pushing through stored furniture and stacked bins, cutting my forearms on sharp cardboard. My breathing sounded too loud. Dust coated my tongue. I kept moving because stopping would mean thinking, and thinking would mean imagining the door rolling up behind me. Somewhere metal groaned the sound of a storage door rising on its track. Not in the unit I had left. Another door, closer, or farther. I couldn't tell. The sound traveled through the rows like a whisper. I forced myself onward, crawling, stumbling, knocking over a plastic tub that cracked loud enough to make me flinch. My wrist thread snagged on a box corner and snapped, the sensation so small and yet so devastating that it felt like a sign. I burst out of a unit into the open lot under harsh white lights. The night air hit my lungs like cold water. Rows of metal doors sat shut and innocent. No one stood between them. No car idled. The facility looked exactly like what it was: storage, emptiness, bright lights meant to discourage crime. My heart hammered in my ears. Then, from somewhere between the rows, the scraping sound began again, slow, deliberate, unhurried. Not rushing to catch me. Not needing to. I ran to my car, hands shaking, and threw myself inside. My keys rattled in the ignition. The engine started on the second try. I peeled out tires, skidding on gravel, and didn't stop until the facility lights were a distant haze in my rearview mirror. On the highway, with the desert stretching dark on either side, I realized the harshest truth of the whole nightmare, whether the killer in India had been arrested or not, whether the feed was run by one person or a group, whether the folklore was true or just a story people told to give shape to fear. None of that changed what had been done to me. Someone had learned my name, my patterns, my places. Someone had used a camera like a hook and my attention like rope. And now, even without a screen in my hand, the idea of the feed lived inside me, ready to flare at any flicker of light. That's the kind of infection you can't scrub off with salt. I don't keep phones anymore. I don't sit with my back to a window. I don't stand too close to strangers holding devices. I avoid mirrors in public bathrooms because they make me think of lenses. I live by rules I never wanted, and the rules have made my world smaller than a cell. There are people who think the worst horror is death. They're wrong. The worst horror is learning that your life can be reshaped by someone else's curiosity and your own. You're reading this through glass and light. Maybe you're already rolling your eyes, telling yourself nothing on a screen can reach out and change the air in a room. Maybe you're counting the coincidences and calling them tricks. That's fine. Skepticism is a kind of comfort, but comfort isn't the same thing as safety. Here's what I know with the certainty of scar tissue: the moment I treated the feed like a curiosity, it treated me like a participant. It didn't need my address at first. It only needed my attention long enough to learn the outline of my life: when I worked, when I slept, how I reacted when a door didn't move. The rest was just effort. Folklore says an evil eye sticks because you carry it for the person who cast it. The deep web version is uglier: you carry it because you trained yourself to look. Either way, the rule is the same. Don't give the watcher handles. Don't offer your name. Don't answer a knock you didn't invite. Don't stay long enough to be counted. So if you've ever gone digging for real horror online, remember this: the most dangerous part isn't what you see. It's what you teach it about you while you watch. What's the one local superstition you grew up hearing, something your family laughed at but still followed when the house went quiet? And if your screen jitters right after you finish this, don't stare at it trying to catch the glitch. Look down at your hands first and make sure they're still yours.